AI moved fast again today, and if you blinked, you missed 3 headlines. This is Tech Roundup on the AI Verge, your daily dose of what actually matters in AI minus the hype. Let's get into it. So right now, in about 83% of global companies, human beings are officially the minority, which is kind of terrifying.
Yeah, it's a massive shift. I mean, the data we're tracking for this deep dive shows that non-human identities, like bots and autonomous agents, they outnumber actual employees 4-to-1.
4-to-1. I mean, that is just, today we're looking at the exact moment AI basically broke out of the chat window and, started infiltrating the core of your operating system.
Right, the transition happening across the industry right now is just absolute. We're moving away from that old retrieval model where you type a query and just wait.
Like a search engine.
Exactly, to this persistent ambient architecture. So the AI is now designed to just sit quietly in your background processes. It listens to your meetings, parses your personal texts, and writes code in your Slack channels.
And as someone who, prefers to keep my digital footprint pretty locked down, my immediate reaction to an always listening AI is just massive skepticism. I mean, do we actually want an AI reading our private group chats?
Well, the tech companies certainly wanted to.
Right. But is it big tech just manufacturing a problem to sell a solution? Because today we are unpacking this whole OS invasion and the hidden $3 trillion infrastructure bill behind it, and an actionable weekend workflow to audit your digital life.
Yeah, the hardware and software updates we're analyzing today, they represent a fundamental rewiring of how computing resources are allocated. And the stakes for privacy are just huge.
They really are. Let's map this out. But real quick, if you want to actually cut through the noise and get the real signal on these macro tech trends, hit subscribe to the AI Verge so you never miss a deep dive.
So let's look at the most aggressive consumer-facing move in our sources today. OpenAI just launched an Apple Messages plugin specifically for Mac.
Okay, wait.
Yeah, utilizing their ChatGPT work and Codex platforms.
We need to look at what this actually does, right?
Yeah.
Because it goes way beyond basic dictation. It actively searches your message threads.
It summarizes long conversations, too.
Right, and it cross-references those texts with your calendar and then drafts replies right from the ChatGPT interface. It's essentially porting your personal life into their workspace.
To understand the engineering motivation here, you have to look at what we call the context switching tax.
The context switching tax. Okay, explain that.
So for developers or analysts who spend like 8 to 10 hours a day inside a coding environment like Codex, switching applications is a massive drain on cognitive load.
Because you lose your train of thought.
Exactly. When you're in a flow state, holding this complex abstract architecture in your head, pausing to pick up your phone, authenticate, open an app, parse a message, type a response, it physically degrades your working memory.
So by pulling the Apple Messages API directly into ChatGPT, they just eliminate that friction.
Right. You can interrogate your text messages the same way you'd query a database.
Okay, but my concern is the cost of that convenience, Texts are completely different from a database. People share passwords, they complain about their boss, they send sensitive medical updates.
Oh, absolutely. The privacy implications are severe.
The risks of granting an external AI persistent access to that data pipeline seem astronomical. And also, looking at Apple's own roadmap in the data, aren't they launching this exact capability natively with iOS 27 this September?
Yes, Apple's native Siri update will perform these system-level tasks on device.
Right. So what is the point of a third-party plugin that's going to be obsolete in like a month? Especially since Apple bought that startup, Q.AI, specifically to make Siri better at this.
Well, that acquisition points to Apple's huge advantage, right? Their native integration will function seamlessly across the iPhone, the Apple Watch, the iPad.
Whereas OpenAI's plugin is just stuck on Mac desktops right now.
Which is exactly why OpenAI is launching this right now. It's a classic user interface land grab.
The land grab before the September event.
Exactly. They are operating on a super compressed timeline. The goal is behavioral lock-in.
So they want to condition power users now.
Yeah, if they can get you managing your communications and scheduling entirely through the ChatGPT window over the next 30 days, you're going to experience massive friction trying to go back to Siri later.
Even if iOS 27 is technically better.
Right. OpenAI doesn't own the underlying hardware, so they're trying to build this indispensable OS layer that sits directly on top of Apple's OS.
It's literally the Netscape versus Microsoft browser war all over again. Whoever controls the primary interaction point controls the data.
Exactly. But OpenAI isn't the only one doing this. The industry reports highlight a parallel move by Anthropic called Project Parca, and this one pushes the boundary way further.
Oh, this one is wild.
Yeah, Anthropic is capturing system and microphone audio on Mac to generate speaker-attributed transcripts and then directly creating what they call runnable work for Claude agents based on your meetings.
Runnable work. I mean, the underlying mechanism here is a masterclass in latent space processing, but it's terrifying. It's not just transcribing text.
No, it uses a background diarization model, which is an AI that segments audio by identifying distinct vocal biometrics to figure out who is speaking in a chaotic Zoom call.
But the leap is that extraction of runnable work. Let's pause on that.
Yeah.
The AI is essentially sitting in on a meeting, listening to human dialogue, and treating it as a software prompt.
Think of it as an automated translation from human intent to an abstract syntax tree, or an AST.
Okay, give me a practical example of how it defines runnable work.
Sure. So a project manager says on a call, we need to update the staging server with the new UI assets before Friday. Project Parca isolates that sentence.
It identifies the speaker,
extracts the intent, and generates a structured workflow. It might automatically prep a pull request for the engineering team, draft a JIRA ticket, and assign it to an autonomous Claude agent to start coding.
It turns ambient conversation into executable code. But the catch here is the fundamental unreliability of human communication, right? We don't speak in clean syntax.
Very true.
We use sarcasm. We play devil's advocate. We brainstorm terrible ideas out loud just to get rid of them.
Yeah, the context window can get messy.
Right. So if a frustrated engineer jokes on a call, like, honestly, this legacy database is garbage, we should just drop all the tables and start over. Is an agent going to interpret that as runnable work and delete the company's servers?
Well, the architecture of these systems absolutely requires strict human-in-the-loop validation for that exact reason.
Because executing destructive actions based on background audio would be a disaster.
It would be a catastrophic security failure. So from a design perspective, Project Parca just generates a queue of proposed actions.
Okay, so it stages them.
Right. It builds the pull request. But a human engineer has to manually review the code diffs and cryptographically sign off on the deployment. The AI preps the tools, but the human makes the incision.
Okay, that provides some comfort, but it's still a massive paradigm shift. These tools are graduating from digital encyclopedias to active coworkers. And employing coworkers who constantly process audio streams requires a staggering amount of compute power.
Massive amounts. Which leads us directly to the macroeconomic data we're tracking today, this $3 trillion infrastructure bill.
$3 trillion. The financial reports show 9 top tech firms have accumulated this in off-balance sheet AI commitments.
To put that into perspective, $3 trillion is roughly the entire gross domestic product of the United Kingdom.
And because it's off-balance sheet, it's not in their immediate quarterly earnings. These are multi-year power purchase agreements, right? PPAs.
Yeah, they're securing future data center land, securing the water rights to cool the servers, and placing huge pre-orders for silicon.
The CMO of Vultr, Kevin Cochran, was quoted in the data saying we're only at the tip of the spear of a 10-year enterprise build cycle.
Everyone is modernizing legacy apps for these agents, but the physical world is pushing back hard.
We're hitting physical constraints on power and thermal dynamics. You can't just scale a data center infinitely.
Right. There's a maximum amount of electricity the grid can supply to one spot and a maximum amount of water that can be evaporated to keep the GPUs from melting.
So the demand for compute is infinite. But the physics of the planet are finite. The software architecture has to change.
And the data indicates a massive industry pivot toward efficiency right now, specifically a memory management technique called PagedAttention.
Okay, break down PagedAttention for us.
So it's a brilliant solution to a huge bottleneck in large language models called the KV cache, or key value cache.
Right, the model's short-term memory.
Exactly. When an AI generates text, it needs that memory to remember the conversation context. If you upload a massive 100-page PDF, the KV cache has to store all of that.
And the problem is that cache grows linearly, right?
Yes. At a certain point, the short-term memory takes up more of the GPU's physical RAM than the actual neural network weights do.
So it starves itself of memory just trying to remember what it's doing.
Yeah. But the real tragedy is the memory fragmentation. Historically, the software would reserve this massive, continuous block of memory for every single user request, just in case they uploaded a huge document.
But if they only ask a short question?
Then like 90% of that reserved memory sits totally empty, but locked. No one else can use it. It's incredibly wasteful.
So PagedAttention is basically porting the concept of virtual memory, which Windows and Linux have used for decades, directly into the AI's attention mechanism.
That's the direct lineage, yeah. Instead of reserving one giant block, PagedAttention chops the KV cache into small, discrete, fixed-size pages.
And it scatters them wherever there's free space.
Exactly. The model stores these little memory pages dynamically wherever there's a few megabytes open on the GPU.
Which completely eliminates the fragmentation. You don't have to hold massive blocks hostage anymore, so the same server rack can suddenly handle way more concurrent users without melting.
It's a massive efficiency unlock. And alongside these software tricks, the physical constraints are forcing a shift away from those giant frontier models toward highly optimized smaller architectures.
Like Pathway's new model, the BDH-CQ, which the research says operates on just 150 million parameters.
Which sounds microscopic when we're used to discussing models with hundreds of billions or trillions of parameters.
It is microscopic. But it's a highly distilled reasoning model, right?
Yeah, the training process basically takes the outputs of a massive model and uses them to train this tiny model on highly specific logic tasks. The BDH-CQ costs a fraction of a cent to run compared to something like OpenAI's GPT 5.6 Luna.
But how does an enterprise know when to use the tiny 150 million parameter model versus the trillion parameter behemoth? Non-technical employees can't make that choice.
They don't have to. The hardware's stepping in here. AMD deployed this new tool called Instinct Coder, powered by Spectro Cloud, which acts as an intelligent inference router.
So it routes the prompt automatically.
Right. When a user submits a prompt, Instinct Coder analyzes the complexity in milliseconds. If it requires deep abstract reasoning, like architecting a software backend, it routes it to the expensive frontier model.
But if it's simple, like summarizing an email, it routes it to the small local model.
Or an open weight model, yeah.
Yeah.
And the data indicates this automated routing is saving companies up to 70% on inference costs.
It treats AI compute like a utility grid, dynamically allocating power based on necessity.
The collision here is fascinating. Software wants AI in everything, demanding more compute, but the data center's physical reality forces ruthless efficiency.
But you can't optimize software forever. If AI is going to live in our ears and screens all day, the physical consumer devices themselves have to change to accommodate these workflows.
Which brings us to the rapid-fire hardware and developer updates. The device you use to steer these agents is becoming a critical bottleneck.
And our sources highlight a really surprising consensus here. The Google Pixel 11 Pro Fold is currently the absolute best device for AI developers.
It completely bypasses anything Apple currently has on the market.
Okay, why the Pixel Fold?
It comes down to two specific engineering choices. The first is integrating Rambler voice dictation natively into the Gboard architecture.
We need to explain why voice dictation is suddenly a massive selling point, because historically, mobile speech-to-text has been infuriating to use.
Oh, it was terrible.
It misinterprets words, ignores punctuation, and if you correct yourself mid-sentence, it just produces a garbled mess.
Right, because traditional dictation relied on rigid phone mapping. It just matched sounds to a dictionary. But Rambler operates like whisper flow that desktop app developers love.
It uses latent space semantic understanding.
Exactly. It listens to the entire context of your sentence.
Yeah.
If you stumble, say, or totally change your grammar halfway through, the model understands your intent and outputs perfectly formatted text.
So Rambler brings that exact semantic accuracy to mobile hardware. You tap the Gemini button, dictate a crazy complex prompt for an agent, and the syntax is flawless.
For developers who think faster than they type, it fundamentally changes how they interact with systems on the go. But the voice dictation is only half of it. The form factor is key.
Right, the inner screen on the Pixel 11 Pro Fold is a massive 8 inches. It's basically a tablet.
Let's talk about how developers actually use that real estate, because the behavior happening in tech hubs right now is just wild.
The data points to this huge influx of developers in San Francisco actively walking down the street with their laptops open, cradled like babies because they can't afford to close the lid.
The laptop walk. It's a symptom of fragile agentic workflows. These developers have autonomous agents executing complex tasks locally, like scraping data sets or managing cloud deployments.
And if they close the lid, the OS goes to sleep, the server drops, and the workflow dies. So they have to physically keep the machine awake and watch the terminal.
The idea of highly paid engineers walking into traffic to babysit an AI is peak tech dystopia.
It really is. But the Pixel 11 Pro Fold supposedly solves this via remote secure shell connections, right? SSH.
Exactly. With an 8-inch screen, you have the visual space to run a split-view terminal. You establish a persistent WebSocket connection to your desktop back at the office.
Menu and logs on one side, active prompting on the other. You dictate a command with Rambler, review the code on the huge screen, and push it to the agent on your laptop.
It untethers the developer.
But what about Samsung? They just launched the Fold 8. The data praises its passport size, which makes it super pocketable.
A passport-size foldable is great for portability, but it completely misses the point for developers.
You need the screen real estate.
Yeah, when you're reviewing hundreds of lines of code, real estate is non-negotiable. Plus, Samsung lacks the Rambler dictation.
So unless Apple's Q.AI acquisition gives Siri a massive upgrade next month, Google really owns the power user hardware market.
Definitely. But we've talked about steering agents from phones. We need to examine where they actually do the work. And that brings us to Slack code.
Slack is attempting to turn software engineering into a highly visible group project.
It's a radical departure from traditional workflows. Historically, engineers write code in an IDE, right? An isolated application on their computer.
They test it locally, push it to GitHub for review, totally siloed from the rest of the company.
But Slack code brings that development environment right into shared chat channels. And more importantly, it invites AI agents into those channels as active participants.
So a non-technical project manager can just drop a requirement into the chat like, hey, we need the checkout API routed to the new payment gateway.
And the Devin agent parses that text, writes the code, and leverages a background container to render a live, functional preview of the new checkout flow right inside Slack.
And the human engineers inspect the code diffs in real time. Anyone can steer the agent with more text prompts until a human cryptographically approves it.
It collapses the barrier between stakeholders and the engineering pipeline. But the moment you invite an autonomous agent into a shared enterprise environment, you hit the most staggering statistic in our research today.
The 83% metric.
Yes.
In 83% of organizations today, non-human identities outnumber human employees 4-to-1.
For every human, there are 4 bots, scripts, or agents operating on the network.
And the truly terrifying part is that only 21% of those organizations have any governance controls in place for those identities.
The security implications are catastrophic. Enterprise architecture is built around human life cycles. Human resources onboards you, assigns permissions via single sign-on, and deprovisions you when you leave.
But AI agents don't have an HR department.
No, they operate on API keys and service accounts, and those keys are proliferating uncontrollably.
Right. An engineer spins up an agent for a database migration. It gets a high-level API key. The migration finishes, and the agent just sits there, dormant, permanently holding that key.
There's no offboarding. No registry of who owns the agent or what data it touches.
Which means a bad actor who breaches the network doesn't need to hack a human's password. They just hijack a dormant, overpowered service account.
This is why the concept of agent HR is now an urgent operational necessity. The industry reports point to platforms like Calibra's AI Command Center stepping in to build a control plane for this digital workforce.
So how does a command center actually wrangle millions of dormant API keys?
It forces strict observability. It acts as an overarching registry. Before an agent executes a single line of code, it has to be registered.
It assigns a human owner.
Yes, maps the datasets it can touch, and continuously calculates a live risk and trust score. If a marketing agent suddenly tries to download a password repository, the command center immediately revokes its key and isolates it.
It brings military chain-of-command protocols to the digital workforce. Without it, invisible entities are just building the company from the inside out.
Exactly. But while enterprise governance tries to catch up, the raw capabilities of these agents continue to explode, driven aggressively by the open source community.
We always talk about closed models from OpenAI or Google, but the open-weight community is moving super fast. The data shows Alibaba's Qwen model just surpassed 3 billion downloads.
We should clarify a technical distinction here, because people misuse the phrase open source all the time. Qwen is an open-weight model.
Right. What's the difference and why does 3 billion downloads matter?
A truly open source project, under the strict open source initiative definition, has to provide the final product, the entire training dataset, the training code, and the architectural blueprints.
Which very few AI models do because the training data is highly proprietary.
Right. An open-weight model, like Qwen or Meta's Llama, just releases the final compiled neural network, the actual mathematical weights, so developers can run it locally and fine-tune it.
So Qwen hitting 3 billion downloads proves developers want to build on models they physically control, not just rent API access from Silicon Valley.
And Qwen's dominance comes down to architectural efficiency and massive multilingual training datasets. But the most significant technical breakthrough in the open weight space this week is from Mistral, with a feature called Agentic Search.
Mistral's Agentic Search is a massive leap over standard retrieval augmented generation, or RGAI.
To understand why, you have to look at why standard RGAI fails in enterprises. When you ask a standard AI a question based on a huge internal document, it performs a one-shot retrieval.
It runs a quick semantic search, grabs the first paragraph that mathematically resembles your query, and tries to generate an answer.
And if the specific data point you need is buried on page 400 of a financial disclosure or hidden in a footnote, the AI will just confidently hallucinate a totally incorrect answer.
It's like a terrible researcher who only reads the abstract and guesses the rest.
Exactly. Mistral's Agentic Search dismantles that one-shot guess and replaces it with an autonomous, navigable loop. They gave the modder 5 distinct tools: search, open, navigate, read, and grep.
Let's define grep for the non-technical listeners.
Grep is a command line utility from Unix systems. It stands for Global Regular Expression Print. It's a highly efficient way to search a massive data set for a specific string of text or numbers, rather than just doing a fuzzy semantic search.
So instead of a lazy one-shot guess, Mistral's agent acts like a forensic detective building a murder board.
That's the perfect analogy. The agent receives a query, uses the search tool to find a document, uses open to load it, navigate to jump to a chapter, reads it, realizes the answer isn't there but sees an appendix reference.
It navigates to the appendix, opens the spreadsheet, and uses grep to extract the exact financial figure.
It has persistence. It verifies its own work. In Mistral's internal testing using Finance Bench, which is notoriously difficult and designed to trick models, this specific search loop increased the model's accuracy from a failing 26.7% all the way up to 86%.
That is a phenomenal demonstration of how giving a smaller model-specific constrained tools produces better results than just throwing raw compute at it.
And that level of meticulous pattern matching is precisely what we need when the stakes are literally life and death. Which brings us to the oncology breakthrough.
Yes, this is the application of AI that genuinely matters to me. I get so exhausted by the hype around AI generating derivative marketing copy or weird videos. The true utility is solving complex physical problems.
The data from the University of Northampton details an AI platform called SensegNet, used to analyze breast tumor samples at a cellular level.
Specifically, it analyzes centrosomes.
We have to dive into spatial biology for a second here. A centrosome is a tiny organelle inside a cell. When a cell prepares to divide, the centrosomes act as structural anchors.
They generate the spindle fibers that physically pull the chromosomes apart.
Right, ensuring each new daughter cell gets the exact correct amount of DNA. They manage the cellular logistics of replication.
But in cancer cells, centrosome function frequently becomes highly abnormal,
Leading to chromosomal instability, or aneuploidy, where cells divide chaotically, driving the aggressiveness of the tumor.
So analyzing these is critical for predicting cancer behavior. But why an AI? Couldn't a human pathologist just look at the slide?
And a human pathologist is great at identifying malignant tissue overall. But SensegNet analyzed data across 911 complex tissue samples from 27 patients.
The scale is just too much.
Right. A human eye cannot manually measure, count, and categorize the microscopic geometry of hundreds of thousands of individual centrosomes across that volume of tissue.
But a computer vision AI doesn't get visual fatigue. It just reduces the biological structures to pixel density and geometry.
And through that pure geometric analysis, SensegNet discovered 2 previously unclassified structural patterns: oversized centrosomes versus extra centrosomes.
Meaning the AI differentiated between a cell having anchors that were physically too large versus a cell producing too many individual anchors.
Exactly. And when researchers correlated those AI-discovered patterns with actual historical patient outcomes, a clear signal emerged. Tumors with oversized centrosomes correlated with longer survival rates.
Wow.
But tumors with a high volume of extra centrosomes aligned with highly aggressive disease progression and shorter survival times.
The AI discovered an entirely new biomarker for cancer aggressiveness just by staring at the data longer and with more precision than humanly possible.
It's spatial biology operating at a scale we could never achieve manually. And they're open sourcing the SensegNet architecture so other institutions can run these analyses.
It underscores the ultimate promise of this technology, leveraging superhuman pattern recognition to decode biology.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today. The macro OS invasion, the $3 trillion infrastructure, the hardware pivot with the pixel fold, agent HR security nightmares, and biological breakthroughs.
It's a heavy, highly theoretical overview of the enterprise landscape, which is why, for the entire second half of this deep dive, we are pulling the focus back down to the personal, practical level.
The transition from enterprise theory to personal utility is where the tech actually proves its value.
We are going to deploy the exact agentic concepts we just discussed to run an actionable productivity workflow on your own computer this weekend. Let's define the problem we're solving first. Digital hoarding and API bloat.
Oh yeah, if you operate in the modern digital economy, your cloud infrastructure is likely a total disaster zone.
We're talking Google Drive accounts filled with thousands of massive, uncompressed video files, duplicate spreadsheets, abandoned shared folders.
And the financial bleed of forgotten SaaS subscriptions. Everyone has a $5 monthly charge for a PDF editor they used once in 2023.
It drains your bank account, and the disorganized clutter drains your cognitive energy. But manually auditing 10 years of emails is a tedious project nobody wants to do on a Saturday.
So we're going to build an autonomous agent to perform the audit for us.
Let's break down the technical setup. What tools are required?
According to the workflow detail in the research, you need 3 components. First, download the GrokBot desktop application.
Okay.
Second, install the official Grok plugins for Gmail and Google Drive. And third, this is a huge optimization if you use business banking. Connect the Mercury MCP to pull authenticated financial receipt data directly from your bank.
Wait, let's pause and explain that third component, because it introduces a critical piece of modern AI architecture. The MCP, or Model Context Protocol. Why is that safer than a standard API integration?
This is the most vital part of the security architecture. MCP is a standardized open source protocol. Historically, when an AI needed to talk to an external source like your bank, it relied on custom API scripts.
And those scripts were brittle and often required full read and write permissions.
Meaning the AI could accidentally modify or delete your data. An MCP server fundamentally changes that dynamic by acting as a strict read-only translator.
Okay, so the AI sends a request to the MCP server.
The MCP server securely queries your bank, retrieves the receipt data, formats it into a clean JSON schema, and injects it directly into the AI's context window.
The AI never possesses the actual API keys to your bank.
Exactly, and the protocol strictly prevents the AI from executing any write commands. It guarantees the AI can only observe the data. It has no physical capability to alter it.
It's an architectural sandbox. Okay, so step 1. Open GrokBot and initialize a new localized bot. Step 2. Authenticate the Gmail and Drive plugins and connect the Mercury MCP server to establish that read-only pipeline.
Now we have the pipeline, but the agent needs instructions. Step 3 is defining the persona.
The research suggests naming the bot Marie Kondo to prime the model's latent space toward decluttering an organization. Step 4 is the prompt engineering, and you have to be highly specific here.
What's the optimal prompt structure for this?
You feed the bot this instruction. Audit my connected email, Google Drive, and financial data. Identify newsletters with a 0% open rate over the last 6 months.
Nice and specific.
Identify duplicated files or large files that haven't been accessed since 2024. Cross-reference my email receipts with the Mercury MCP data to identify recurring paid subscriptions and extract the direct URL to the cancellation page for each one.
That prompt is excellent because it defines the exact parameters. It assigns specific mathematical thresholds, like the 0% open rate.
But the output format is just as important. You have to instruct the bot to synthesize its findings into 3 strictly categorized lists. List 1 is safe to clean. List 2 is needs review. List 3 is do not touch.
And you must demand that the AI provides a specific logical reason and a mathematical confidence score for every single item on those lists.
The confidence score is a brilliant mechanism. Large language models don't possess human certainty, but they calculate log probs, right?
Yeah, log probs, which is the logarithmic probability of the next token being accurate. By forcing the model to output a confidence score, you force it to surface its own internal log probs.
So if the AI flags a massive PDF for deletion but assigns it a confidence score of like 12%?
Yeah. It's explicitly telling you that the semantic content looks important, and it lacks the context to recommend deletion safely.
Now, I have to step in with the ultimate skeptic check here.
Fair.
Even with the read-only MCP architecture, I am deeply uncomfortable giving an AI unrestricted access to my financial receipts and tax documents. How do we guarantee the agent doesn't hallucinate and accidentally cancel my health insurance?
You must build explicit, non-destructive guardrails directly into the prompt. The AI will follow the strongest instruction it is given.
So you append this exact phrase to the absolute end of the prompt so it remains dominant. Under no circumstances are you permitted to move, delete, unsubscribe, or cancel any file or service. Your function is strictly limited to observation and documentation. Do not execute any actions without my direct manual approval.
It cements the agent's role as an auditor, not an executioner. The AI does the exhausting manual labor of parsing files and surfacing cancellation links, and hands you a highly organized digital clipboard.
You review the clipboard, verify the confidence scores, and you manually click the buttons to delete or cancel.
So here is the weekend challenge. We are not asking you to audit 10 years of digital history by Monday. Start with a highly constrained environment.
A micro deployment.
Exactly. Take 30 to 60 minutes this weekend. Initialize the Grok bot, apply the strict guardrails, and point the agent at one single, deeply disorganized folder in your drive.
Or just point the MCP solely at your email receipts from last month. Let the agent build the 3 lists, review the scores, and see how much wasted subscription money you can reclaim before Monday.
It's the safest, most practical way to familiarize yourself with how agentic workflows operate in a low-stakes environment, using the exact same underlying architecture that massive enterprises are deploying.
And it brings the entire conversation into focus. The technology scaling in data centers to read Slack channels is the exact same technology you can deploy locally to regain control of your own digital footprint. Before we wrap up the show, a quick reminder. If you deploy the Marie Kondo audit this weekend, make sure you are subscribed to the AI Verge so you don't miss the breakdown of next week's macro trends and workflows.
Let's run a crisp recap of the core takeaways from the data.
The macro shift. The era of the passive chat window is over. AI is actively integrating into core operating systems via tools like OpenAI's Mac plugin and Anthropic's Project Parca. Because these agents are executing persistent workflows, enterprise security is facing a crisis. We desperately need agent HR control planes to manage the proliferation of dormant API keys.
The critical event to watch: Apple's September hardware event. The whole industry is waiting to see the technical capabilities of the native iOS 27 update and whether Apple's localized Siri can successfully repel OpenAI's aggressive attempt to hijack the UI layer.
In your actionable weekend task, set up the Grok bot with a read-only MCP server, deploy the Marie Kondo prompt with strict non-destructive guardrails, and eliminate the API bloat draining your bank account.
A highly productive deployment of local compute.
But before we sign off, I want you to sit with one final, deeply unsettling thought. We established at the top of the show that in 83% of enterprise organizations, non-human identities outnumber human workers 4-to-1.
The sheer scale of that imbalance is difficult to fully conceptualize.
As these agents become increasingly autonomous as they begin listening to the audio of every meeting via Project Parca, writing the core software in Slack channels, and dynamically routing their own compute power via tools like Instant Coder, at what specific moment does a company's organizational chart officially belong to the software? When do the human beings transition from being the managers of the AI to simply acting as the human-in-the-loop assistants to a fully automated enterprise? Keep a close eye on your own company's ratio. Have a great weekend. See you next time.